Hi everyone, welcome to Cortisol, the podcast that puts you in the shoes of a member of the European Parliament and that tackles topics that raise your cortisol level and that are close to your heart. So today I'm happy to be back because actually, to be fully transparent, this is the first episode, normal episode that I record after the live discussions, the trilogy on toxicity at work. So it's really nice also to get back to this usual format, although I really enjoyed, and I thank everybody who joined for the live sessions on toxicity at work. And I seize the opportunity to welcome all the new subscribers that join Cortisol's channel thanks to that. And I will already spoil a bit by telling you that I am already thinking of another live session idea for the end of the year. So stay tuned. That being said, today I'm very happy to welcome Marion L'hôte, who is the guest of today. She is Senior Policy Officer at the European Cancer Organization. She's been working there since summer 2023, focusing on survivorship, quality of life, and equality. Marion, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me and for having me.
It's really a pleasure to have you, and especially on the topic of women and cancer, especially because I think we agree that it's important to talk about it during the whole year and not only, for example, when it's Pink October, although of course it's very important, but it's really something that we should talk about during the whole year. How are you feeling today?
I'm good. For those who don't see, the sun is shining in Brussels, so it's very nice. Almost spring. All good. And you?
Finally, I totally agree with you. I'm happy that you brought the sun today. I know it will last only 3 days, but let's make the best out of it. A few hours ago, you sent me some elements of your biography. I didn't mention them at the beginning because I wanted, especially for this part, I wanted you to share spontaneously what you wanted to share, because I think that what I read was very interesting and kind of moving. And I wanted to ask you if you would indeed agree to share with the viewers and listener why you decided to specialize in health policies.
I think it's super nice to raise awareness on those topics. Anyways, I'm always happy to do it because it should not be a stigma. So basically, I have a younger sister who's 7 years younger than me. And when she was only 10 or 11 years old, she was diagnosed first with anorexia bulimia. And this led to years of being in the hospitals and being treated for this, and it revealed when she was 14 that she had bipolarity, and since then she's being treated. But when this happened, I was 17, 18, so I was not even an adult, getting constructed, so it kind of shaped me, at first not really in my studies, but shaped me as a person, being aware about these diseases that until you really meet them, you don't really realize what it is, or you bear some stigma around it. And so in my studies, at some point, I always did European politics, but I had to specialize at some point when you write a thesis. And so I did, and it was in 2021, 2022, so in the middle of the COVID crisis, and I took a health class. I was generally interested in mental health, of course, but just as a normal person would be. And so I decided to do my thesis on mental health policy making at the EU level, because at the time, now it's 2025, and in 2023, there was a communication on this from the European Commission and lots of action in the COVID pandemic. But before, it was really a loophole. There was basically a green paper and not much around it, no money being injected, just a few actions. So I did my thesis on mental health policy making at the EU level, or more so the lack of it. And I met some MEPs and everything to discuss, and that's how I got super invested into the political aspect of it. And this led me to being recruited. I mean, first I went through the commission a little bit for an internship, but then I went to ECO. They recruited me as a policy officer, as an officer actually, for survivorship and quality of life and mental health, and that's how I got into it. So I think it comes from a personal background, but I think it should be normal to just talk about it and explain where you come from. And thank you for doing that.
Thank you for talking about it and for working on it. And can I ask how your sister is today?
She's okay. She's almost 20. And she's studying really hard, and she made a lot of progress. She grew a lot. I think at some point you reach a form of maturity, and I think she's also aware of what's happening to her, and she talks about it freely, and it's refreshing to see young women talking about their diseases and not hiding it and not being ashamed of it, but saying it's part of who I am and saying it to people up front and Yeah, I'm proud of her, I think. No, she's better, for sure.
We say hi to Nino. It's always nice to show also some sorority between actually sisters. So that's great that you can, share about this experience. Okay, so coming back purely on the topic of the day, which will be dedicated to women and cancer. I had the idea to invite you because we were in touch already a bit, and you told me that you were about to write a policy action paper named "Women and Cancer: More than 12 Million Reasons for Action." So, of course, you initiated it with other people at the European Cancer Organization. And I just wanted to ask basically first, what were the reasons that motivated this paper? Why it was so important to gather data and knowledge on cancer with a specific focus on women?
Okay, so from the ECO background, so back in 2023, they did an action on men and cancer. So it was time to do the counterpart. But more generally, we're a holistic organization, so we don't focus just on one cancer type or another. We want to look at all of them. And it's true that in the European level, there's many organizations that are focused on, for example, Lung Cancer Association or Europa Dona does breast cancer. So there was not really a holistic view of everything that affects women and cancer. And so given that we had women and cancer and that there was a lack of data, of research, of policy recommendation, there's a great report that exists at the US level on this about women and cancer from the Lancet Commission, but it touches about the whole world with a focus on the US and America. So there was nothing done at the EU level with this all-encompassing way. So we decided that it was time to write it, and people were really happy to finally see this, someone doing it at EU level. And so we consulted a variety of people, Alexia included, of course. But people from the cancer bubble and people outside of the cancer bubble, so people from UNFPA, UN Fund for Development, I think, as well as people from the mental health bubble, so Gamian, people from the disability bubble to really discuss about women with disability facing cancer, feminist associations, of course, and it turned out as a nice piece and a nice to do.
Of course, I'm gonna share the link to this paper in the description, but I'm gonna spoil it a bit because I based my questions on that because, as you said, I contributed, but I still learned a lot of things about it. And in the first part of the paper, you go through the factors that increase risks of cancer, and of course, there are stuff that we all know, like, for example, tobacco or alcohol, of course, increase this risk of getting cancer one day. But you underline that these two industries, especially so tobacco and alcohol, have robust gender marketing strategies to specifically encourage women to consume these harmful products. So, of course, I don't expect you to have the miracle solutions for everything, but can you tell us if after writing this paper and consulting all the stakeholders, you found some answers on what can we do to limit the impact of these gendered marketing strategies?
Yeah, so maybe a little bit of background. In Europe, we're the continent that drinks and smokes the most. And there is rising trends in women smoking and drinking. And I think in societies, unfortunately, we tended to associate this with men behavior. However, it's really rising in the women cohort as well from binge drinking episode. But this is due also to a new consumer market that has emerged in Europe. So especially, I think, for more so the case for the alcohol one. But you can find a plethora of examples online. But what we call pink drinks, or mummy wines, or even what is branded as light calorie drinks, or everything that is raspberry, pink colored, is actually made for the women consumers. And we see a trend. We actually see companies having whole departments dedicated to the gender and marketing. And the thing is that there's a loophole in legislation because it's something that is regulated at the national level. So we see at the EU member states, the all 27, some countries have laws to ban this. For example, in France, there's the Loi VI0LENCE that, for example, prohibits influencers or publicities in general to publicize these types of alcohol, but it's really not the case everywhere. So it's one of the things that we should push for, that more countries, because I think for now, to my awareness, there's only France and Norway that does this. And I think the the answer would come from the EU to, first of all, encourage other member states through recommendations or conclusions to do similar stuff. But the real loophole here is that this issue really happens on the digital platforms. You will not really see that in the streets, in the metro. You will never see like a very beautiful woman, very thin, drinking light sangria, like it is, for example, the case in the US. But online, you're bombarded with this type of content without even realizing it. And of course, we did some desktop research. And if you go to any brand, I mean, I'm not going to name brand, obviously, I think I can't, but you see some of them, for example, posting collaboration with nail influencers with the bottle on the nail. And it's such a glamorized version of what drinking is, when it should be really not that. And there's no ban about drink responsibly or don't drink if you're pregnant or if you have cardiovascular diseases. And the thing is that it does not appear in any form of digital moderation law at the EU level. There's really nothing there. So we didn't know too much about that, to be honest. We discovered it when doing the research there. We contacted some other organizations working specifically on alcohol. It's a bit more so the case for tobacco because it's more strict, but you can still see some loopholes and examples of companies doing it in social media, and nothing happens. There's no sanction. So one thing we recommend is having a code of conduct from companies from the alcohol and the tobacco industry to actually ban gender marketing, but that would be only a voluntary ad hoc solution. It's nothing binding legislation. So on this, there's also the European Beating Cancer Plan, which is a roadmap for cancer policies that was initiated by the previous commission in 2021. And there's a big chapter on prevention that actually should address these issues. It doesn't mention gender marketing, but it mentions, well, the commercial determinants of health. And this chapter is not really progressing, and we only have 2 years yet until the end of the plan. So on our side, we're also pushing and advocating for, after this ends in 2027, that it's being refreshed, this Beating Cancer Plan, with new components about the gender aspect. And I think it's also, as I was saying, case by case of country needing to really do this, so raising awareness on this. European Cancer Organization can do this, but there's many actors doing it, but of course we need funding to do that. So we're thinking during the year we're going to contact, for example, the alcohol and tobacco representatives in Brussels, meeting them, explain the case, and if not, maybe go a bit more aggressive in between brackets. So it's going to be interesting, actually.
Wow, you're gonna meet with the sharks.
If they receive us, I hope.
Hopefully they will be open to at least listen to you, but I totally agree with you on the glamorization of, whether it is tobacco. It was more, I would say, I remember very well when I was a kid, it was very banalized in movies. Like it was seen as something very sexy. Now, maybe it's because also I have a French background. I see it less, I notice it less, although, as you say, we don't have a EU harmonization about it. But it's true that alcohol, it's still very present. Like I have so many times when for, relatives or friends, it was suspicious that I wasn't drinking, for example, and that they would imagine, automatically that I were pregnant, for example.
No, it's crazy. Yeah, there's a stigma of not drinking, but I think even I realize when I go for drinks sometimes, I tend to go for the more feminine, like everything that is pink or a bit raspberry or strawberry. And now I realize that I'm like, wow, because the drink looks pretty. And sometimes I think there was even glitter in a drink or something. I think it's also important to realize that. And back for the tobacco, I think it's more the puffs, the electronic cigarettes, the issue. Because, I mean, now, as you were saying, like normal cigarettes are a bit less associated with sexiness, and a bit people see the harm because there's actually like labeling on this. That is not the case on alcohol. But for the puffs, sometimes there's a very sleek, feminine design. Feminine, of course, in the way society see it. And the flavors as well are crazy. Again, cotton candy, bubble gum, very pink design. And some countries did ban it. France recently banned it again, the puffs, like 2 weeks ago. But in many countries, it's still allowed to sell them with those terrible additives and terrible flavors. And there is no actual front-of-pack labeling on this.
With these particular types of vapes or puffs, I don't remember how we say, but you know what I mean. What is really bad right now, I saw something about it in French news, is that it's really something for kids, like 13 years old, 14 years old kids are trying to get those, and sometimes it's even their own parents that buy for them because they don't see the danger. They see that everybody has it, so it's fine. It's a trend. Kids need to have that to not be excluded at school. Really, it's terrible. But I wanted also to tackle the kind of cancers that affect women the most. And so without surprise, unfortunately, we have breast cancer, but also colorectal cancer and lung cancer. For breast cancer, as we said, we have the Pink October Awareness Month. For lung cancer, as we said, it's associated a lot with all the campaigns about ending smoking in general. But I was wondering why the awareness, the prevention, around colorectal cancer is still so taboo nowadays.
I think, first of all, for the background, colon and rectum cancer is what we refer to when we talk about colorectal cancer. It's a weird disease in the sense that it affects equally men and women, but in different ways. So men have a higher mortality for that, but women get the most affected for very aggressive types of tumor that are deadly as well. I think the issue for women there is that there's specific symptoms for women that include, for example, anemia, but also abdominal pain and bloating and everything that could be associated actually to menstrual cycle pains or menopause pains. And so women tend to always overlook these symptoms and think that it's okay. The women will ignore sometimes what their bodies say to them and say, oh, it's just a menstrual pain, or I'm too young to have colorectal cancer, when actually colorectal cancer is associated with something that you have when you're 70, but it's not the case. There's more and more young people and young women getting it at 30, 40, also because what causes colorectal cancer are also the risks we mentioned, alcohol and tobacco and poor diets. And that's why so many men get it, because men tend to consume still more of these and have more obesity rates than women in some countries. But yeah, it's an issue of just not doing the colonoscopy. In some countries, colonoscopy is not part of the screening campaign, so women will not get it automatically, because also sometimes they have a burden at home caregiving, and so they will not engage in that. I think it's okay for them. They will not get it when they could get it, and it's rising trend. And again, overlook. So I think it's important, and that's what we say to people, is that they should really listen to their body, look for the age when you should get screened. I think it's 45 years old for women now, used to be before. But I think it's ignored also because, to be fairly honest, as you were saying, the biggest cancer type for women is breast cancer, and there's very strong associations there because it touches more women, of course, so there's more funding directed to that, and we tend to focus all the women and cancer energy on these types of cancer when there's more and more of them. Some of them are aware and are women-specific, like ovarian cancer, fallopian tube cancer, everything that is in the reproductive zone that is very deadly as well, because breast cancer, although it's terrible, is one of the less deadly cancers and one you can recover from the most if it's caught very early. And there's lots of money from EU level and from national level into screening and to diagnosis and new therapies. So I think we need also to shed a light on all these other types of cancer, especially colorectal. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I agree. And I think in general, considering also the area of cancer, it's more taboo for certain people to decide to go to make themselves checked at the doctor, etc. But let's do a bit of prevention here. It's better to go through this moment of uncomfort than to risk to let it grow until unfortunately the chances to survive gets too low. You just mentioned actually also unhealthy diet and lifestyle as one of the reasons. It's not only that, but it can be a reason to get cancer. And this is also something that caught my attention in the paper, because we can read, among others, that due to their caregiving and family responsibilities, women may have less time to exercise and cook healthy meals. We can also read that healthy food is likely to be less accessible to women because they are more exposed to poverty. In other words, gender inequalities can have a critical impact on women's health. So I wanted to ask you, do you think it is time to accelerate efforts toward a more feminist health policy? And what would be the priorities to implement to counter these inequalities in health?
Yeah, so I think health was never really seen under the gender perspective. It was more seen as something for society in general, even not just for women, but it was never seen through the lens of disability that much or LGBTIQ lens. So it is time for sure for a more holistic, for all the inequalities, but a more feminist approach to health. So we're in March right now. So a few days ago at the EU level, there was a roadmap for women's rights that was published, which is sort of a first stepping stone towards the next gender equality strategy, because the one we have now ends in 2025. And I think for one of the first time in a document that comes from the feminist equality agenda, there's a mention of health there, and an actual real mention of health, and not just, in the preamble saying, oh, we need to pay attention to health, but actually saying health here is one of the guiding principles. And in health, there's also the whole bracket of sexual and health reproductive rights. So we don't know yet what is going to be in this chapter. We hope that cancer is going to be in this chapter, because it's still the leading cause of death for women, next to cardiovascular diseases. So we hope both of them will be featured there. But it's time that the equality agenda features health, and it's time that the health agenda also features gender equality, that those discourse and merge together. So we see positive steps there, but we're also in a context. I mean, we're speaking pretty much here at the EU level, of course, but I feel, and I mean, I'm sure you shared the idea that there was a tilt to the right and to the extreme right, more and more with the rise of the extreme. And also, to me, the whole EU agenda sounds very focused on defense and competitiveness doesn't really include health. And all the texts that I see and all the programs that I read, they're not really inclusive of this. And I mean, it's a shame, but it's the same for health. And I mean, at least on our side, we'll try to advocate for this to be pushed. We'll try to meet as many actors as possible. I'm not going to name anyone either, but sometimes in institutions, when we ask for a meeting to someone that is also not from the health bubble, but on the equality agenda, they say, no, we don't do that, we don't do health. And then to the health, we go to them and say, oh, we only have one person doing gender mainstreaming. And it's pretty crazy that people think a bit in silos, where actually it should be really together. So yeah, I mean, it's a great first step, but we'll see how it goes. And for sure, it's time for more and more of this. And if it's not stemming from the European Commission, it can also stem from the European Parliament that has a strong interest in that. I think also what's a great sign is that recently the Public Health Committee of the European Parliament became an actual committee and not a subcommittee, so it has legislative power, and they're starting a consultation on women's health. So I don't know what this will lead to. I know FEM Committee, so the Gender Equality Committee, is also doing an own initiative report on women and on women's health, or gender disparities in health. So we see little initiatives popping by, but then it's not really concrete legislation yet. So it's nice, but we need to step a bit forward rather than just says.
Yeah, it's true. As often regarding women's rights, it's often not binding, and we need to count on member states' efforts. And that's precisely why we are still here today, because member states lack a bit of political will still when it comes to women's rights. But it's good to know, I mean, sadly good to know, that you face the same struggles in the cancer area, because I thought that since, the Commission was much more open to have a strategy on cancer, I thought it was a step closer to the Europeanization of this aspect of health, and I thought that it would open the door to the Europeanization of health in general, because for sure, when it comes to especially sexual and reproductive health and rights, we also have a lot of closed doors when it comes to SRHR, to abortion even more, because once again, it's member states' competence, and you have to count on member states' political will. But of course, if you count only on the political will, see you in 200 years. But yeah, I'm very sorry that you are also experiencing this closed doors. And I really hope, it's a broader discussion, but I really hope that at some point health will be really Europeanized. I think we will all benefit from that.
We had a first glimpse of it during COVID-19 pandemic, when we thought, oh, we're buying vaccines in common, we're doing these things together, recommendations from EU level, and since then it backdrop completely. Health is not really a key priority in the agenda, and I mean it's a whole other discussion, of course, but I mean a pandemic could come again and strike again, and we'll go back to ground zero. So it's a question of political will and commitment, as you say, but we were optimistic that this will emerge as a trend. It's just not, because priorities are being put elsewhere because of defense and war gleaming, and that's important, of course, but it goes together because you need to tackle the root causes of inequalities, and that's health inside.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I mean, it's part also of preparedness, I think, like, especially like medical supply, things like that must be prioritized if something happens. So yeah, this is a call to decision makers. So please listen to this, and especially when it comes to cancer, SRHR, abortion. These are life or death matters, and we cannot wait any longer. I wanted to, I promise I'm not going to torture you any longer, but I still have a couple of questions when I wanted to focus on how cancer can impact women specifically on particular aspects. And over the last years, I saw many women going through cancer, publishing calls on social media. I saw it especially for aggressive breast cancer that were discovered apparently a bit late. I think we called them triple negative breast cancer. And these women were using social media to crowdfund, to get money, because the medical protocols they needed, in the case, from what I observed, it was most of the case French women needing to go to Germany, because Germany had a medical protocol that could help them, but they had to cover the costs, and not only the treatment, but also the hotel, the food, if they had family, to bring their family. So, I mean, it's a very brutal question, but I think we need to put it on the table. Does it mean that depending on where a woman lives, it means that she has more or less chances to survive nowadays in 2025 in Europe?
Yeah, no, it's backed up by actual data from European countries doing cross-comparison. Indeed, if a woman comes from a northern or a country, more specifically, I think Sweden and Denmark have great rates, rather than if she comes, unfortunately, from the eastern country like Bulgaria, Romania, she does not have the same chances of survival to her disease. That's because there's often a lack of public funding, a lack of actual infrastructures. I think in the countries where we live, here in France or Belgium, we have what is called national comprehensive cancer centers that treat the whole disease and do great follow-up during survivorship and provide up-to-date treatment. And there's actually the drugs that are usually one shot of chemo is super expensive, that is being directly reimbursed. And recently, I think it's nice also to say that a country like France, again, I'm citing France a lot, but it does great stuff for women with cancer. But they just passed a law 2 months ago reimbursing, for example, when there's an overspending for women, it's directly reimbursed, weeks being reimbursed, therapy being reimbursed. So there's great disparities. So of course, I mean, I think also it's important to say that it's also an intersectional issue. So if a woman comes from an ethnic minority, if she comes from a rural area, if her education level is low, if she has a disability, I mean, all of this also reinforces the idea that she will have lower survival rates. But also on the brighter side, the survival rates are still getting better at the EU level in general and in countries compared to 20, 50 years ago. So there's progress being made. It's just that the disparities are still cross-cutting, which results in women having, if they have the money to do that, to another country, cross-border healthcare. Thank God there's some legislation being passed on this and the ability to do that, but still, just also sometimes women are not aware that they should get screened at the country level because the government doesn't engage in campaigns, or they live in remote areas that are not accessed. And all of that leads to terrible results, and it depends on the country. But the data is here, I think, for people looking for a source. The European Cancer Information System provides nice data on this.
So once again, here we have a point on the need of Europeanizing health. I also wanted to touch upon something that for me is looks very important when somebody goes through cancer. It's the support of the relatives and friends, like all the social network around. And unfortunately, I went through very depressing data. It was tackled a bit upon in the report, but I found I wanted to dig on this topic, and I found even more depressing data about that. And this data was about the fact that facing a breakup or a divorce is 6 times more likely for women with cancer than for men with cancer. And even worse, you also underline in the paper that women with cancer are more likely to experience intimate partner violence as a result of the diagnosis. So first of all, like, you know, reading this was very shocking, and I cannot imagine how it is to go through this. And by the way, of course, this episode is totally dedicated to survivors of cancer and all the families that went through cancer by accompanying somebody. So yeah, I was very shocked by that, and I wanted to ask you if you have any knowledge of member states reacting to this kind of situation and having structures, shelters for these women so that they could escape this violence while continuing their treatment.
Answer might be a bit as depressing as the data, because I mean, fully agree with you. I checked a bit. I didn't know about this either until I was writing the report. It's hard to find the data, but especially for women who have cancers of the reproductive system, are having 40% undergo a divorce or a breakup because of its, well, whatever effects on perceived vision or fertility. There are some examples of countries that have some structures, but I think honestly it's not something that is harmonized at the national level, but rather maybe associations or NGOs or a bit of structures, but I think we can count them on the fingers of the hand. So I think, for example, one that does something, and also to be aware that they're not dedicated to women with cancer, they're just for women, and some facilities have beds or can provide medical treatment. But in France, I think there's a Maison des Femmes, a women's house, that provides this. In Belgium, I think there's something similar in a few institutes where they can provide for support and for a bed and for whatever form of treatment continuation if you undergo intimate violence from a partner. But there's nothing more than this. There's no fund. There's no public money being spent on this. I mean, it's also a general case of women who face this, healthy women, not in a disease. I'm not sure. I'm not aware, and I would be interested to know if there's actually more structural things being done on that, but I've not really been aware of that. I don't know.
No, it's I mean, of course, it's a structural lack of shelters, of support. We'll see how the directive on combating violence against women will be implemented, and also we'll be happy to suggest when it's being revised some improvements. But of course, it's a structural issue. But in the case of women with cancer, I was also thinking like, wow, it's once again what you mentioned before, the intersection, because, you know, like already having a cancer is a matter of life or death.
Losing your job or not being able to return to work, or, you know, still having children sometimes to take care of. It's a terrible multi-layer issue.
Yeah, so, I mean, the more we talk about it, the more I realize how much work there is to be done. But that's great. I think really this policy paper is a very important milestone and the start of something strong. And I am aware of the time, but I really wanted to also end with one aspect that is mentioned in the paper, and that is really as important as the rest, because the paper also covers the topic of women as caregivers. There is also women in the healthcare workforce. I'm very sorry I couldn't, do more questions because I tried to have digestible episodes, but happy to do an episode about it with a healthcare professional later on. But really I wanted to focus on women as caregivers, because there are 100 million caregivers in Europe, and women provide more or less 2/3 of care. Knowing that, of course, as you said, being a caregiver to a family member is often unpaid work. It triggers other consequences like you work less or you even lose your job. And I was wondering, how can member states and employers, because employers do have a responsibility about that, I cannot stress it enough, how member states and employers can do to break this vicious circle, because, it starts by working less, so being paid less, then maybe losing your job. And then you end up in this cycle of precarity and poverty at the end of the day. So, do you have concrete tips to help with that? Let's try to find positive notes.
I mean, I think the first tip would be to actually recognize the status of caregivers. It's not done in all EU member states, which is crazy. Some member states do not actually recognize that this exists or do not quantify it. So I'm thinking Estonia, Bulgaria, it's not a concept that does not exist. So I think, first of all, if we see the positive aspect, if we can, when you treat and take care of someone with cancer, you don't treat them, but you administer the drugs and everything. Sometimes you gain skills. And I think we think there needs to be a legal recognition of these skills that can be transferred for any form of, diploma or anything that recognizes that you've done that, if you want to pursue that later, or if you want to claim perhaps some financial compensation. You cannot pay informal carers as such, but you can offer at a national level an actual financial compensation. It's not really done. Some countries do it. Another thing to do is actually creating carers leave at whether it is a national level, but also as an employer recognizes that this person needs to take some time off and not just terminate the contract and lay him out, but actually recognize the structural need for this person to take a leave. So the training also is an important aspect that is often not mentioned and can actually be funded, for example, at EU level, because someday you might wake up and your husband or your daughter has cancer and you've never known the disease, you don't know what to do, never treated or helped treated someone like this. So being trained would be the best you can do. And on this, for example, there's stuff that are being done at EU level for healthcare professionals, like a great project that we coordinate at ICO that is called Interact Europe, that provide free training on some topics for healthcare professionals, free of charge, digitally. For example, for people to get trained on mental health and psychosocial needs. And we hope soon on gender components. But this is something that can be done at EU level and that should be done also for carers. But again, there is not even the recognition. And there's a care strategy now at EU level. It's something new, but before it was never really addressed. So again, baby steps. But starting with recognizing, actually quantifying it, because the real numbers are often not the ones that are given by the country. They're very much amplified for this Euro Carers, for the people who are interested. So the Euro Carers, the European Informal Care Society, has great data about each country and what each country does in terms of recognition, of training, of compensation, and carers leave and everything. So you see a great disparity. Not even from the Nordics, surprisingly. I think the country that is doing really well in this is Austria and Luxembourg. And of course, sometimes some Eastern countries are performing a bit less well, but also the Baltics. So, it's a bit of a mix and match.
Yeah, but that's really good to know about all these disparities, because it says a lot about how a culture value or not care work. And I totally agree that it's a more structural problem. Also, the fact that care hasn't been valued for decades, if not centuries. Of course, because it was mostly women doing that. I think that if it was the other way around, care jobs would be super paid if it were only men there. So yeah. Okay, thank you so much, Marion, for answering all these questions. This leads us to the moment for, against, abstain. We go back to the principle of the vote. You are a member of the European Parliament and you have to vote for, against, or to abstain. I decided to pick the proposal on the table, basing myself on one of the key things that I read in the policy paper. And it's true that the gendered marketing aspect really struck me a lot. I really invite you to check the paper, because there you have also all the illustrations, etc. And when I was reading it, I was like, wow, yes, but also wow, I internalized those so much, because as you said, I was just like, oh yeah, this looks nice. I mean, personally, I always like raspberries, so it's not a matter that they add it or not. I always like raspberries, but still, indeed, the packaging does have an impact, and I think that over time we just internalize this kind of things. So to go back to the proposal on the table, the proposal would be the following: to prohibit gendered marketing in tobacco and alcohol industries and impose neutral packaging. So of course, neutral packaging exists in some countries for tobacco, in most countries, by the way. But it's true that for alcohol, it's just full creativity. By the way, I know that I have a friend working in the wine industry. She will not be very happy probably about this proposal. I'm sorry, but at the end of the day, I think we should take our responsibilities and not banalize, not trivialize alcohol. So as usual, you are most welcome to vote through the comment section on YouTube or even on Instagram. And I'm looking forward also to read your amendments, because usually I have some proposals for amendments. So yeah. I have some committed MEPs in the Curtisol community. So Marion, thank you again for sharing your story, your expertise, and to answer these questions. Just before we finish the recording, I want to go back also to the tradition of the decortisol moment. So you may be familiar with it. First of all, I will ask you to pick a color.
I'll go for red.
You go for red, and then I will ask you to give me a number between 1 and 10.
7.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And you have to check the colors inside.
Not gendered.
Okay, this one, kind of turquoise. And it's question number 4. So question number 4, the first time I think I have it in an episode, is if you could be reincarnated as an animal, what animal would you choose?
Super nice question. I think I would be a domestic cat, because you're adopted by a family that usually chooses you. Unless, of course, there's animal violence, but that's another topic. They're not too invasive of your time, so you can do your own thing, go to the garden. Life is not too hard as a domestic cat, but still you can explore and go a bit crazy. I mean, I'm not particularly a cat person, but no, I think that would be that. I was hesitating between that and a horse for some reason, but I went for the cat.
So you like animals that are all for freedom and independence?
Oh, I just know I would not be able to survive in full nature, like in the jungle or something. So I think I need the comfort of a home or of a stable or something. But yeah, but still you socialize and see people. You're not alone somewhere and fighting for food or survival. Maybe it's not super brave, but if I'm reincarnated and have the choice, I'll go for that.
Well, you are already a brave human being by doing all the work you are doing on women and cancer in general, on survivorship and quality of life. So you can afford yourself in your next life as an animal to be a bit less.
Yes. Thank you
so much, Marion. And thank you all for watching. Don't forget to think before you click. We are all human beings at the end of the day. That's a very important reminder. See you soon on Curtisol. Bye-bye.
Bye.